G'day YouTube. This is going to be a response to this deadly vaccine. This is my second video on this about Lee. I figured the first one was just a response to his latest one. This is how the whole thing started. Lee talked about betting on Main Street, right up here. Bet on Main Street. Here's a short video. I want you to look at it. Okay, I watched it, and I didn't buy it at all. Lee then says, Jesus says we're princes of sons most high, and that we should receive taxes from Klaus Schwab. Why is Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and the rest of them, why are they our subjects? Anyways, he says then, I say in response to him, if we're slaves to he says, like, stop being a slave to Wall Street, and we're going to be bet on Main Street. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. If we're slaves, we're supposed to be obedient to our masters. And then I quote him from the Bible here. Yeah, with a sincere heart. And of course, I'm being a little bit silly, but I think the whole thing is silly. Like, you don't actually owe anything to Wall Street, and Wall Street didn't do anything to you. So anyways, like, it's not to you specifically. You have something made up that you think Wall Street's done. From James, the servant of God. He quotes me James 5, verse 1. Now, I respond back to him, like, because he's not listening to what I said. If Wall Street's your servant, then carefully follow him. Submit fully. And then he comes back with another James 5:4. So I'm like, all wages are paid. I respect and honor those in charge. James talks about submitting to God and resisting the devil. And I come back with a Bible verse too. And I tell him, I like this little quote here. Be a slave worthy of Wall Street. And I'm doing this partly because, like, Lee's an educated person, and I wouldn't do this just to any trailer trash or something like that. I wouldn't do this to anybody who's really not with it, but Lee's got it a bit together. So I figure I can joke around with him a bit. This is scriptures, and he is totally into scriptures, but he is smart enough to know what we're talking about here. I'll see if I can move the whole screen over just a little bit. There. So, now he quotes me another Bible verse, and I question marks. You, the slave of Wall Street, are not to fight. Christ himself instructed you to be the best slave. I don't understand your response. And he does this whole, the salvation thing. Yeah, and I'm like, you're distracted off the topic. We're talking about whether or not to be a slave to Wall Street or a slave to Main Street. You're currently a slave to Wall Street. You can't just switch to Main Street. And I mean, I am joking. I know what they're saying, buy local. But Wall Street has not enslaved you. And he's like, I am on topic. And he's like, no, we're talking about Wall Street versus and about buying local. You chose the subject bet on Main Street. I think it's great if you identify as being a slave to Wall Street and offer to explore this in detail. we're not hitting barriers here. What you're saying doesn't ring true. Neither of us are a slave. Like, it makes sense what I'm saying here. We aren't exhausting ourselves in any effort to pay our expense. We live well. We live with air conditioning. Our tummies are full. And we aren't exhausting ourselves. By any stretch of the imagination, we don't exhaust ourselves with work. So, and the public in general, we're putting less effort in getting more results with a shorter workday. Safety has increased as physical lifting has been reduced. And I talk about air conditioning and stuff. We're living like kings and queens. So, like, I really don't get it. Like, and I'm serious. I think we're on the edge of reducing our 40-hour work week down. Maybe 30 hours. It's possible we could even get to 20 hours. And I think that will be the future. We won't need people in the workforce as much. There won't be, it will be make work projects. Like, there isn't that much left. And he responds back with a Bible verse, which kind of, I'm having the feeling here that he's not reading anything I'm sending. And I respond back, you refer to yourself as a slave to Wall Street. And he talks about Alexander Copper, whatever, did him great harm. Well, Wall Street hasn't harmed you. And it's not belittling you. And on the contrary, like, and I respond back, make every effort to be good to your master if Wall Street's your master. And he talks about Christ. And I say, listen, be good to your slave. Be a good slave. And then he comes back with a Bible verse. Yeah, and I propose that you are neither oppressed by the selling and purchases of corporations. This bet on Main Street rather than Wall Street. Like, this whole thing with Wall Street is corporations getting credit, getting more. You have a credit card, and you see, a corporation can't just get a credit card. So that's what I'm talking about there. This Wall Street is about corporations getting some funds. How they get credit. If their stock is down, they have less credit available to them. But if their stock goes up, they can either sell stocks or they can show their stock to a banking institution and get credit. And he's gone back to Bible verses, and I'm like, so you didn't read what I just wrote? See, I respond back to him like, all this sorrow and stuff, and grief, and carry out our sorrows. And I'm like, you have grief and sorrow? My belly is full, and it's comfortable. God is good. And he comes back with more Bible verses. And I'm like, this has nothing to do with your Main Street or dislike of Wall Street. I'm doubting you're serving Wall Street with your best efforts. Like, I don't believe you for a second. So I am baffled by this whole thing of and then he says the crucifixion of Christ has everything to do with the topic of choosing Wall Street over Main Street. And I really don't understand, because Wall Street is a credit system. Like, all businesses make use of some credit now and then. Like there's very few that just work fully on cash. And I don't understand what this has to do with the crucifixion of Christ. And he comes back with more Bible verses. Yeah, so how exactly, what about the betting part? You talked about betting. Like, what are you talking about, honestly? And I'm saying, like, I'm calling you out. Like, you're not being truthful here. I just so you know, this is like, we're at 70 on these crazy emails. But we're not going to go through any of the more of them. What we will do is I'm going to show you what happened here. He keeps sending me Bible verses. So what did I do? I went up and looked up the charter. There's a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and there's a charter, like that applies to all Canadians. When the cops read you your rights, you have the right to remain silent and all that. That's in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Well, and that was done by Pierre Trudeau. Well, we also have a Charter of Corporation, a Charter of the Rights of Corporations. And if you're going to read off Bible verses and just print them without any context or anything what you mean, then I'm going to read off the charter. And then he just comes back to me with another Bible verse, and I come back to him with more of the charter. And he comes back to me with I just read off the charter, and I'm reading off point by point of the charter. Every time he sends me a Bible verse, I send him more charter. And we're going to go through the whole entire charter. Yep, exactly. And he doesn't fully get it for a number of emails, which is very surprising to me. But I thought, well, you're fully versed on the Bible, and you're talking about betting on Wall Street over Main Street. You should know the charter that we're following. Like every corporation is following this charter, and you're saying you have an in-depth knowledge of and it doesn't make any sense. Oh, and here he says, he does this all the time to me. Are you Elijah? Since we know we're not talking about Bible verses, I'm guessing you're either speaking of, and I list off 2 people, Elijahs in business. And I certainly did have some trouble finding Elijahs like that. Yeah, and this is the crypticness of Lee. Like, so you are not Elijah. You didn't have to worry, I'm not Ahab. Well, we weren't talking Bible, so I wasn't thinking you were Ahab. And why would I think you're Ahab? I'm talking to you, Lee. Like, why would I think you're Ahab? Okay, I never went off topic. The oppression of the globalists. What globalist are you talking about? Whoever they are, the government, your buddies and corporations, and okay, yeah, the prophet Micah. Okay, yeah, off to that. The prophet, your buddies succeed, and he goes into Bible verse after Bible verse, and like you might guess that Lee is he's educated he's gone to Bible school. I don't know how many years he spent there, but he's never been a pastor, and he's I believe he's retired now. So so I was always on the topic, the crucifixion of Christ has far greater part in buy local campaign than any problem people might face. Oh my word. The crucifixion of Christ dying on a cross, has to do